I'm Ronell Coburn with Nellwell Health here in Nashville, and I recently sat down with Barry Coburn, who is a very successful music executive and a New Zealand native who's had type 1 diabetes since he was 52 years old. That did not stop him. He became president and CEO of Atlantic Records. He was manager for artists like Alan Jackson, and as a music publisher, he represented Keith Urban for many years. He also was a concert promoter for many years, and he worked with the Eagles, Elton John, Led Zeppelin, Duke Ellington, Black Sabbath, Chuck Berry, and the list goes on and on. I have known you for a very long time, and I've always been amazed at how you manage your type 1 diabetes. And I've always thought it would be a wonderful thing to share with the world. And so why not do it? So
okay.
It's a long journey, and you've had it since you were 21, and so there's a lot to tell. And I think if we can just reach one person out there and make their road a bit easier, that would be a good thing. So
glad to help.
Right. So I mean, just to sort of talk about type 1 diabetes a little bit. As we all know, there's a big difference between type 1 and type 2. And then there's now type 3 diabetes, which is related to Alzheimer's. They have found that insulin resistance can cause Alzheimer's, and they call that now the type 3 diabetes. So type 1 diabetes is autoimmune related, and that is when your immune system attacks your pancreas, and the beta cells in the pancreas then no longer create insulin. Mm-hmm. So that is partially genetic, and that's also partially an autoimmune condition. Then type 2 diabetes, as we all know, is caused by diet and lifestyle, mostly. So your particular diabetes is not as common as type 2 diabetes, but there are also a lot of people in the world that are suffering from type 1 diabetes. The management of type 1 diabetes and type 2 is similar, as far as I know. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, but really mainly just focus on type 1 diabetes, which is the one that you've dealt with for so many years. I think like more than 34 million people have diabetes, type 1 and type 2 in the United States. That's 1 in 10 people. And then 1 in 3 has prediabetes, or the early stage of diabetes, which is 88 million, which is frightening. Mm-hmm. And the more people can get educated about this, the more they can manage it potentially, and with type 2 diabetes, actually reverse it, where type 1, which you have, is not reversible. So anyway, so you just tell us your story. I mean, you grew up in New Zealand, and
I frequently feel that the bad news is that my father had diabetes, and the good news is that my father had diabetes. He had contracted type 1 diabetes when he was 20 years old, around 1940, and of course it was the management potential then was very bad. What I can remember as a child was my father having bruises on his legs and his abdomen from injecting, because in those days the syringes had very long, hard needles that were sort of like fencing wire, and now of course we have super fine needles, so I don't suffer that, although occasionally I might get bruised. My father, unfortunately, when he was 46, he stubbed his toe, and in my grandmother's garden, and it didn't heal. It got infected. It turned black and blue, and it was then gangrene set in due to circulation problems.
Right, and also nerve damage that's caused by long-term blood issues and long-term blood sugar issues.
Right.
Neuropathy that causes that.
Right. So unfortunately, over the next 9 months, they amputated his big toe, his foot, his lower leg, and his upper leg. And after 9 months of watching that as a 14-year-old, he died. Terrible journey. I can still smell the acrid smell of gangrene, and I would recognise it anywhere. And I hope I never smell it again. When I was 20 years old, I suddenly went through a change in my lifestyle from not being, I was active and so on, but I began working briefly at a farm sort of bureau operation, and I went from leading a relatively active life to running 2 miles a day to my work, and then pushing bales of wool, which weighed hundreds of pounds, around, lifting bags of grain and loading them on trucks and taking them off, which weighed 70 pounds.
What part of New Zealand was this?
This was in Auckland, New Zealand.
Auckland. So this wasn't in Christchurch?
No, I had moved to Auckland. And I was in the music industry, and I was wanting to get my own business going. And I decided I wanted to get fit and healthy and have good muscles to, And I started doing all of this exercise, and I started to fall asleep in the 30-minute lunch hour or lunchtime I got, and sleep on the bales, and and I was urinating a lot, and I was urinating through the night. But I thought that was just because I had been drinking a lot, because I was exercising much more than I had, working 8-hour days, lifting and so forth. But then gradually my eyesight started to fail, and from my room at the house I lived in, the neon sign across the way gradually went out of focus, and I started to think, I wonder if this is diabetes related. And the more I sort of started to lose weight, and I was thinning again, I thought that was due to my lifting weight and all of that. But over about 5 weeks, it really got worse, and I could see my eyesight was failing. I went to my doctor and said, I believe I've got diabetes, and he was like, you can't have it, your age. They did tests, and it was like, yes, you have it. I went to my first endocrinologist or diabetic specialist, and I still remember the meeting. He was an older man, of course. I was 20 years old, and he said, son, the best thing you can do is find a good woman and get married, someone who will look after you and prepare you 3 meals a day that are well managed, and you should be able to lead a good life. Well, I thought, hell no, not me. I'd watch my father, who was a professional musician and a band leader, and I was like, I don't intend to do that. And I was already working for record companies, and so I just decided that, having seen my father, I would never let what happened to him happen to me. Mm-hmm. So I resolved that I was going to exercise daily, not to the level I'd been doing while I was working, but I was going to walk every day and maintain good circulation. And now when I talk to people that knew me back then, they all say the same thing, that I was emphatic immediately after breakfast, that I would go walking. Back then, that's the thing, when I asked them, well, what was I really like? Tell me the truth. And they said, sometimes you were a little bit, vague, but you always were emphatic that you had to walk every day. And I believe that is the difference for me in having had diabetes now for 52 years.
What do you believe the circulation, how is that beneficial?
I think that all of the studies that I did through the years was the problem with diabetics, particularly those that are out of control, displays itself in many ways. That they have neuropathy in their feet, and they feel discomfort. They obviously if they don't exercise, they put on weight, which again requires more insulin and is not good overall. The kidneys and liver aren't functioning as well. The heart isn't kept in good condition because it's not pumping. These are all my theories. And then add to that your eyesight will definitely suffer from the very small fine capillaries in the back of the eyes, and that will cause clouding. And then sexual functions will go away. I mean, it's a problem with diabetics, that they could lose that. So for me, when I talk to endocrinologists and to the people who are my sort of medical people now, they all say, like, you're just, I mean, I don't wish to brag or anything, but they say, it's amazing that you've gone this far.
How many years?
52 years.
That's amazing.
And I went to my eye specialist back about 10 weeks ago, and he said, my partners and I were talking about you today. We've got records of you going back 32 years, and your eyesight now is at least as good as it was when we first met you. And that is truly remarkable, because most diabetics we see, well, every other diabetic we've ever seen at 25 years of diabetes has issues coming in. And so my theory is that exercise daily, and I walk rain or snow, I'll go out and walk, and, on the rare occasions I don't, which is probably, one day in 40 or something I don't. I do press-ups and crunches.
Yeah, I think you said that it affects your metabolism as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I don't, and again, I've always exercised where I can in the mornings, because I believe my body is just adjusted to that, the cycle of insulin I take, and it allows me to start my metabolism off. If I ever have a day that I don't walk, the difference, or delay walking, the difference in terms of how my food metabolizes and my blood glucose levels is changed in a very negative way. Mm-hmm. And I just I don't want that. And, because every type 1 and type 2 diabetic, in dealing with their specialist who's looking after them, can get their A1C test, which gives an average of the previous 12 weeks. The sediments that collect in the blood allow for an analysis to be made, and as best I remember, that started about 32 years ago, where they could do that. So you can see the average for the prior 12 weeks based on the sediments in the blood of what the blood glucose level is. So I've never had a blood A1C that was outside of 5.2 as the lowest point and 6.2 as the highest.
Which is normal.
So I've stayed in that range, and they always say at Vanderbilt Medical Center, you've got the best clinical record. And I say, I'm hardly perfect. I'm a bad guy sometimes. And they go, no. The amazing thing is that your average has been maintained at that level. So I feel that for me, I'm far from bragging. I'm just really grateful that I haven't had any of the things we talked about. My functions are still great. My eyesight is great. I wear reading glasses at night, particularly in dull light, but I think most people my age certainly do. And everything else is feeling good. And I hike a couple of times a week and do a few extra miles. And every morning I do
miles, yeah.
And I do 2.5 to 3.5 miles. I'm sort of got it up at about 3.5 miles a day now, come spring. And I just go for it, and I keep a good pace. I just regard it as a morning meditation. Mm-hmm. It's when I think. Sometimes I'll listen to books on tape, but
how did you manage your diabetes not with the equipment that we have now, when you were in the swing of the music business and you were doing the touring and all of that?
At times there's certainly been times I didn't lead the life that the doctor, my original doctor said, get married, da 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 da. I didn't get married for another like 15 or 16 years after that. In the meantime, I got into the music industry, became a concert promoter, spent time staging concerts with Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath and Elton John and many other artists. So my early stages of diabetes, within the first 3 years of diabetes, I did all of those tours plus many others, and I was on the road flying, from city to city across Australia and New Zealand, and I just had to manage it the best I could. The manner in which I can protect myself and look after myself has changed so dramatically, and that's why when anyone says, "Oh, I can't take injections," or "I can't do a finger prick blood test," now I go, absolute, get over it, grow up, don't complain to me, don't blame it on your wife, your husband,
or a busy lifestyle.
Yeah, there's absolutely zero reason now, because the potential management of it now, there's just absolutely no reason why you can't do it. This morning I had a call from a friend who I've known for a long time, who's had diabetes. His A1C levels have been pretty high, and when I've called to check on him, he lives in Mississippi, and he had said, "Oh, everything's fine. My A1C is 8.2 or 7.9 or whatever," and I'll go, "That's not acceptable, Tommy. You can't do that." And anyway, I convinced him last year. Well, I've been trying to talk to him for 3 years. The manner in which we can look after ourselves now is just so more refined and so much easier. It's not long ago that the only way I could, when I first got diabetes, the only way I got my glucose levels was I would take a sample of my urine, I would have a little eyedropper and a little test tube, and I would drop 5 drops of urine, 10 drops of water. I would, shake it around, and then I would put a tablet in the water, and then I would wait 1 minute or 2 minutes, depending on how late, and I would then the color would settle in the tube, and I would compare the color to a
It's like
chart.
being a scientist in a lab.
Yes, and then that would show me what overflow had been in my urine, but that would show me what it was 4 to 6 hours ago. So you had no control. And blood tests in those days, if I went to my doctor for a regular checkup, he would take a sample of the blood, and then I wouldn't get the results for 3 or 4 days afterwards.
Yeah, that would just be a snapshot of that particular moment.
Of that moment. And so there was no way. And then I recall the first blood glucose test I got, which was a big plug-in thing about the size of a brick. And I was living in Australia, and I remember I had to plug it into the electricity, and then I took a little screwdriver, and I had a swinging sort of needle like a car oil level or petrol level, and then I would get the red and black center done, and then I would take a big sample of blood and put it on the strip at the end of it, and then I would wait 2 minutes, and it would tell me what my blood glucose was. And I thought that was the most miraculous thing I could ever have. It was just a joy when I got that, and made my management easier. Then over the following years, quite rapidly, came battery-powered ones, which was spectacular because I could test on an aeroplane or traveling, and it was just magnificent. And then over the following years, we got smaller. I've got the current one that I can use. This is just a small one here, and this this one has just a little face here. You put a test strip in here, which isn't very large, and then you can put a sample of the blood just on here. You just bang this into your finger, and it's a very small sample of blood. And 5 seconds later, it prints out what your blood glucose level is. Now, it used to take 30 seconds. It went from 2 minutes down to 1 minute to 30 seconds. When it got to 5 seconds, and that was probably 10 or 15 years ago, it meant that if ever I was driving to lunch or dinner or at any time, or, I could stop at a traffic light, a stoplight, just quickly do a blood test. And I knew where I was, and it just gave me such a difference in my control. But of course now it's gone on from those difficult times to now there are electronic devices, and there are constant blood glucose monitors. And this is just an absolute revelation. I've had mine for, I believe, about 4 years, and the newer model made by Dexcom, which is covered by most health insurance plans, and Medicare and Medicaid absolutely will cover it, because the cost of these little units is actually less expensive than test strips, because test strips are quite expensive to make. They used to cost a little over $1 each for every test.
And you did many tests a day. And
yes, well, again, they used to tell me at Vanderbilt that I did more tests than anybody else. And I did an average, I think, of like somewhere between like 7.2 and 8 tests a day. So, because I would never eat without knowing what my blood glucose was. And if I was reading a paragraph and I read it again, I went, wait a minute, I've just reread that. That must mean that I might have a lower blood glucose. So what we have now is a little thing you can put on. I mean, I think I can just show you here. It's a small unit here. Let me just show you. It's this little thing here, and there's a transmitter in here, and that transmitter transmits every 5 minutes what my blood glucose is, and it will either transmit it to a small. You can get a small thing like a cell phone, which is separate, or you can add it to your iPhone.
Right.
And so this is what the face of mine looks like, and so what it
right.
shows is.
And then you can see your average, right?
And this shows me what my blood glucose right now is 118, which is highly acceptable. And then you can turn this. And the grey field here is my target range. I set
You're
myself,
right in there.
And so that shows how many hours have I got here. I've got for the last 6 hours, so that's what, but you can review it and look at it over 24 hours. But the other great thing about this is that I can look at any time and go, well, I shouldn't have eaten that, or that had more sweetness if I've eaten at a restaurant, and I can make adjustments. I never eat ever if my blood glucose is above 140. I just wait a few minutes. I'll take my insulin, and then I'll just wait, because I know that if I eat when it's higher, it's just going to go higher, and it will take a lot longer to bring it down.
So you take the insulin, it then comes down.
Yes.
And at a level, what are you comfortable with for it to be for you to eat?
Oh, anything below 140.
Okay.
But the great thing about this is that I can now travel solo. I can get on international flights. I can, it used to be that it was always a bit of a worry getting on a plane and going to England, or even getting on a plane and, or to Australia, or even shorter flights, and staying in hotels alone, because when you didn't have the protection that this provides, you could have a low, and you could,
right, and especially at night, if you're by yourself, and if you're not able to, you're sort of sleeping or just falling asleep, and you don't know that you're already low, you could have big troubles, because you could get to such a low that you go into a coma,
right,
and that could be a big problem. So with this one, there's an alarm that goes off.
Right.
When you go too low,
well, yes,
in the middle of the night or whenever, and then you just adjust what you need to do. You eat something, or if it's gone really low, you take the glucagon or the glucose.
Glucose tablets. But
right.
Yeah, the great thing is this: you just don't have if you manage it well, you don't have the highs and lows. I mean,
right.
You can really keep it, just at a great level. And the alarm system is wonderful, because this will ring and just wake me in the middle of the night.
Right.
If my blood glucose, it'll warn me that my blood glucose is dropping rapidly, or that it's hit a lower level, and I have it set at 70, so that if I drop below that, I know that it's going to keep going lower. So I just get up and have half a banana or something, and then I'm fine for the rest of the night. And similarly, if I'm in, well, unfortunately I haven't been to New York City for a couple of years, but if I was ever in New York City walking more than I normally would after my walk, if I was walking between appointments, I would get a warning. I could eat an energy bar as I was going to the next meeting, and I was always fully protected because I didn't. Now I have to look for a place where I could finger prick, and do a test in the lobby of a building, or, you always felt you didn't really want to show blood off to people. People were.
How important is it to know the carbohydrate content of food?
Extremely. I mean, I just always have been cautious and learnt to understand, what a spoonful of rice, how much it had, or a slice of the right bread.
White rice, the glycemic index is extremely high.
Yes, it'll hit your blood glucose very fast. And, the breads I always choose are normally, whole wheat or, multi-grain. And I guess I've just learned to look at things and go, okay, well, that's about 15 grams of carbohydrate in that slice. And so if I make a sandwich, or if I get a sandwich, that should be fine. What else is going to be inside that sandwich? As well as some hummus, that'll be a little bit of carbohydrate in that. And no, I don't want to have fries with that. Doesn't mean I don't have fries occasionally, but it depends on what other carbohydrates I'm having.
Right. And also alcohol, like beer.
Beer and things. I mean, that's the funny thing. People just think, some diabetics think, oh, well, it's a light beer. It's, a Bud Light beer has almost 4 times as much carbohydrate as a Miller Lite beer, and other beers. So just because it's a light beer doesn't mean that the carbohydrate level isn't higher. So you have to think about what you're drinking. Diabetics don't have to not drink if they want to drink alcohol.
Right, and you eat dessert too.
Yeah, even with desserts. I mean, you've got to look at the whole picture and go, well, what have I had? How much carbohydrate? Again, sometimes if I am looking at a meal and I know that someone's made a special dessert, I like cheesecakes, but I don't have too much of them. And normally with my first taste, I can work out whether it's something I really should have or not. And then I can also have an adjustment. I can have, with my insulin, I mean, some people have pumps, but I use an insulin pen. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about this as a delivery device is it has a number here, and I can literally just dial in if I'm going to have 10 units of insulin before a meal. I just do that, and then I dial up the number of units I want. I take off the needle. It's a tiny needle. It's you may be able to see that. It's just minuscule and very, very fine, 32 gauge.
So it doesn't hurt that much.
And no, I mean, I've got very little bruising. Occasionally you might hit a vein or an artery and it might bleed a little bit. That goes away rapidly. It never bothers me. But that's more a rarity and then I inject sort of around my abdomen or in my rear end, just spread it around. So I take 10 units of insulin per meal. Many take different varying stages.
Yeah, you don't eat giant meals typically.
No, I don't. And then in the evenings I take a longer acting insulin, which maintains my blood glucose overnight. And I normally take that when I'm going to bed, and that's in a different coloured pen for obvious reasons.
You want to make sure you don't get those confused.
Never, no, yeah, that's exactly right. And this is a much slower acting, and that really sort of peaks. This one will peak within 30 minutes to an hour and a half after you take it, and therefore is sort of in cycle with the body's breakdown of the food you've just eaten, and it works in cycle. And then if you're taking this three times a day, there is some sort of hangover of the release of it, and that, for me, having a similar amount at the same time keeps my body. I mean, it's proven it's kept my body in sort of a really good cycle. And then overnight, I take this longer acting one that keeps it down. And again, I've never been troubled by injections. I've taken 74,300 injections so far in my life. I think I can do it. And she was like, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, I've worked it out." I said, I had to work it out recently. And I said, "So I think I'm going to be fine." And she was sort of just like taken back by it and laughed. But that's the truth of it. I just can never believe that people, a number of diabetics have said, with this test kit and taking a blood sample, they're going, "I can't do that, I can't do that." And I'm like, I did it 8 times a day, 7 days a week, for 30 years.
What's the main reason people don't just do the constant glucose monitor? Is it just because it's inconvenient?
Well, I think there's people that initially are hesitant. This friend of mine that I spoke earlier of in Mississippi, he was sort of reluctant. He was like, "Oh, I don't want to do that. It just sounds like a hassle." Another friend a diabetic that I spoke to in Chattanooga not long ago, he didn't want to do it, and he kept putting it off. So I don't want to deal with it. And I'm like, this is going to make your life dramatically better, because you have to change the patch with the transmitter.
You can take a shower with it.
You can swim with it, and you change it every 10 days. So I put one on, and then there's a little transmitter inside the sensor, and then I take that transmitter out, and then I put a new sensor on the other side, put the little transmitter in, reset it, and off it goes. So I only have to think about doing anything as far as blood glucose monitoring every 10 days.
And that's so much better than having to prick your finger all the time to do the test.
It's so dramatically different. But most of all, I get this report every 5 minutes. So I know whether I've done good or bad, and I can correct it.
I was sort of thinking for younger people too, for younger kids with type 1 diabetes, you can almost look at it as some sort of video game, because you want to stay in the margin, It's like, okay, I need to know the rules of this game. I need to know what not to do, and I need to understand it so I can win, because you want to win. And if you get those numbers, you've won. You've gotten to your level that you want to be. So,
well, over the years, I've been on the board of the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation and the Vanderbilt Diabetes Center as a sort of a patient advocate, and I've looked at parents who have got young children with type 1 diabetes and been mortified at the idea of young children getting it, because back when we had to do finger pricks and everything, you can imagine it was just like it would hurt, but more than anything, the parents would be troubled. I mean, sleepless nights, going to check if Johnny or Mary are okay. Now they put one of these constant blood glucose monitors on, and not only can you have the transmission going to an iPhone or a little monitor, you can have that transmission relayed to the parent's cell phone. So the parents could, for that matter, be on a different level of a house, and they would get a warning if the blood glucose was out of order.
That's fabulous.
And similarly, with teenagers, you might have a teenager who has got diabetes, and they get their first car and they start driving, and you as a parent are mortified just by the fact that they're driving, but you can now get the transmission,
right,
and call and go, "Hey John, you shouldn't leave college yet. I don't know whether you checked, but your blood glucose is at 71 and dropping. You need to eat something before you drive 30 miles to get home."
And I know someone who works as an diabetes educator, and she works with large corporations and trucking companies that have a lot of truck drivers. And she's telling me how many truck drivers have diabetes, because they they have horrible schedules, they have horrible food, and they live sedentary lifestyles because they're sitting all the time. And when you think of a truck driver driving, going potentially low and losing focus, it's a truck.
Oh, yes.
That is a frightening thing. So for them, it's almost essential to have, so they can tell where their blood sugar is.
No, this technology is magnificent, and I think there are two companies that are actively in the marketplace here. But the Dexcom system I've used is very good. Their support systems are great. They have people around the country that will answer questions. But they have a new model coming perhaps later this year, which is even smaller than the one I've got. The first one I got was larger than this. And the next one is going to be even smaller, the transmitter. But it doesn't, I mean, I'm relatively small. I mean, I only weigh 154 pounds. So it's not really, like, it doesn't show itself. I mean, if I'm just wearing a T-shirt, no one would really know. And but it's not just convenience, it's just the practicality of being able to protect yourself and prolong your life, because as I often think over the years, the diabetics I've tried to speak to, I'm just astonished at people who have not been willing to take the steps necessary. The great country singer Waylon Jennings, I used to speak to him about it, and his wife Jessie would ask me to talk to him about it, and he just refused to make changes. Ultimately, he had a leg amputated and then was gone. And I just feel so sorry for people that are resistant to doing this, because the difference in quality of life and the potential to extend your life by following some basic principles, which to me I've never regarded as being that difficult. I mean, there are certainly occasions when I get mad if I'm higher than I expected, and then I go, well, what was that? And then I think, well, there was that rice and it did taste a little sweet, at the restaurant, or it might have been that I did have a mouthful of that margarita that someone was having.
What do you usually order at restaurants? And what do you try and stay away from?
I stay away from fried foods. I stay away from anything that has extra carbohydrates or batters and things.
Or portions where you can't tell what the carbohydrate content is.
Yeah, I don't want mixed things. Like I'm cautious about stir fries and so forth.
And big clumps of bread.
Yeah.
And big sandwiches with big bread.
Yeah, I had a meal last week where I thought what I was cutting into was a squash, like, because it said there was something squash in it, and it wasn't till later my blood glucose went high, and by chance I'd taken some of the food at the end and just put it into a doggy bag to bring home, and I looked at it and realised that what I thought was a squash casserole was in fact like a thick, dense sort of cornbread type thing, and it had been sort of concealed in a sort of a hot sauce, that it was really much more carbohydrate loaded than I expected. And for me, if I'm high, if I'm 200, I'm angry.
Right, and white rice with sushi is typically a problem.
Yes, sushi is a problem because it's the binding element that's in that. I mean, there's a binding that holds sushi rice together, and somehow that has extra carbohydrate that adds to the white rice.
The sticky rice.
And white rice will actually hit your blood glucose and lift your blood glucose faster than a banana or an orange will.
How important do you think is it to know the glycemic index of most foods?
Well, I think that if people who are, my sort of theory is you've got to be careful with diabetics who are perhaps trying to become better managers of themselves. If you don't want to give them too much information initially,
right.
but once you get a grip on it and you understand carbohydrate levels,
complex carbohydrate versus simple carbohydrate.
Simple carbohydrate, yeah. And if you can if you can learn those things, and it's so much easier again if you're learning and you can see the effect of things. You can easily, this friend in Mississippi who I spoke of, he called me today. He needed some help with his meter and asked me questions, and he said, I cannot believe what I didn't know, because I used to just eat these things and thought that they had this much carbohydrate, and I now realize they had vastly more carbohydrate than I thought. But he said, I've got my blood glucose down. He said he's actually reduced the amount of insulin he's taking by about 40%.
That's wonderful.
Because he said, when you used to tell me how much insulin you took, and I thought about how much I took, he's a little heavier than I am. He was like, I can't believe what's happened to me in the last 2 to 3 weeks since you forced me into doing this. He said, my life is so different. And he was talking today again about how much better he feels, that he's going to start walking this week, which I told him, I've been telling him for years that you've got to get your butt out the door, and you've got to do it in the morning, and because that's when, if you do it and you get into a discipline, I just sort of regard it as being a little bit of the meditation for me. The morning walk,
right.
I can take the time to listen to an audio book or something else, but I just feel that if you can get into that zone, you're so much better off, and get the circulation going, even if you are hurting, if you've had diabetes for a while, and you can gradually build that up, because a lot of your body can be repaired and re-energized. But again, I think constant blood glucose monitoring is such a large part of the puzzle now.
Right.
And it's part, obviously as time goes by, we may have other things that are being developed, but looking at what is available now, I can't find any reason. I was talking to a friend whose son is now 12 years old, and he's had diabetes since he was 7 months old. And they went through, as parents, the horror of guarding their son,
right.
Against the possible problems. And now he's just so well managed, and they feel so much more comfortable.
Right.
He's playing basketball, which would have been impossible prior, because he couldn't stop and do blood tests in the middle of the game as easily as you can now.
Right.
His father or mother can sit on the sidelines and tell him, you need to grab a glucose tablet or whatever. You're wearing down. It's dropping.
So just like briefly, what is like a typical day? So just to kind of, and you probably know your routine and ritual as it relates to your dosing, your insulin injection. But what is it more or less on a typical day?
Well, as soon as I get up, of course, the first thing I do is look at my meter and just see where I am. Go, great. I find even making the bed, I get up, make my bed first thing, and I find that my blood glucose will drop, through lifting my arms to fold things up and move things around and make it all right. Frequently, it'll drop. If my blood glucose is a little higher than I want it to be when I first get up, I might take a couple of units just to bring it down. I find that when I have coffee and cream, it will lift my blood glucose, because I think it's partly the adrenaline that is stimulated by having a little coffee.
And the cream has a little.
And the cream has a little as well. If you use whole cream, it's got less carbohydrate than half and half, but it's not a big adjustment, but it can be enough. For me, I'm a little demonic about trying to keep it right. Then I'll have breakfast, and I normally have oatmeal or 2 slices of wheat toast. And occasionally I'll have 2 or 3 mornings a week I'll cook a couple of poached eggs to have on top. And then again, because I've got the constant blood glucose monitor, I can be watching what's happening.
And you go and exercise right after you eat.
Yeah, and
right after.
And I watch what my blood glucose is happening, and sometimes it's a little different. But with a constant blood glucose monitor, I can look at it and go, wait a minute, I was 130 a couple of minutes ago, I'm 135 now, and it's going up. I'm out the door, and I better get my jacket on and get out of here.
Because you wanna keep moving when it starts to go up, correct?
Right, exactly,
Right.
exactly. And then I head out, and I'll either go out to a lake or a trail and hike. In which case, if I'm going to do that and I've got to drive a little distance, I'll make myself some coffee and I'll make what I call a toast sandwich, 2 slices of toast with some peanut butter and whatever in the middle of it. I'll take it with me, inject when I get out there, and eat it, and then go for a walk. And depending on how much hiking I'm going to do, if I feel I'm going to go on some higher trails with hills, I'll take a little less insulin, because I'm going to burn up more carbs.
And then if you do go a little low, if you're like doing a lot of exercise, you have like little pieces of candy or little bits of sugary snacks.
I have little bags that I keep, and I've got them in every jacket pocket I own, and so I always have 3 glucose tablets in one bag, which gives me 12 grams of carbohydrate, and then I have 3 pieces of licorice, chunks that I buy at Trader Joe's, and they have about 4 grams of carbohydrate in each as well. So I've always got carbohydrate. If I'm going to hike, I'll always have a couple of energy bars in my pockets as well. And again, with a constant blood glucose monitoring, I can know what's going on.
How do you know how many grams of carbohydrate you should take to level out your blood sugar?
Normally, if you're dropping, and the important thing is to try and catch it before it drops too far, because when you go high, it takes time to bring it down.
Mm-hmm.
When you go low, it takes time to bring it up, because
Right.
it takes your body has to process what you're putting into it. Glucose tablets will break down quite quickly, but if you're out hiking and continuing to exercise, you don't want to be hiking when you're less than 70, because it's just going to keep going lower. So if you're out walking and your blood glucose drop, you're better off just to perhaps just take a break for 5
Right.
minutes and let it catch up. But when on a normal walking day, I just get up, have my breakfast, get out there, and walk 2.5 to 3.5 miles. I mean, if you start with half a mile, if you haven't been doing it, great, and then gradually build it up, and you're going to find as you build it up, you'll either need less insulin, or to counteract the amount of carbohydrate you're eating, from your past experience if you were just starting to exercise.
Mm-hmm.
But again, with a constant blood glucose monitor, you can do that. So if I perhaps start my day at 7:30 or 8 o'clock, I have the insulin, then I know where my blood glucose is. Previously, if I was just using taking finger sticks, I could still know where my blood glucose was before lunch. And then I take my insulin before lunch. If I was a little high, I take it a little, perhaps if I'm going into a restaurant, I'll take it just as I go in, providing I know I'm going to be able to be seated and get the food.
Right.
But I've got it down now where I can go to a restaurant and I use this, and I just lean forward at the table, and no one ever really knows. I mean, I had lunch with a fellow on Friday, and we talked about diabetes, and he said how he'd been just diagnosed as pre-diabetic, and I said, yeah, well, I take 4 injections a day, and he was like, what? And I said, yeah, I've actually taken one since we've been here, and he was like, no, you didn't. And I said, yeah, I did. I said, the start of the meal here, I did. And he was like, how come? How come I didn't see? And I said, well, I was just, I just put it in my stomach, beneath the table, and I can dial it up. I can hear it click. I can take a quick glance at the pen and know that I've got the right amount, and I can inject and then put the cap back on the insulin pen, and no one ever knows. I don't have to be embarrassed about it. If I'm with people that know me, I'll do it. No one needs to know. It's not that bad. And if I'm at a friend's house, I'll just go and use their bathroom and inject, or just step around the corner where no one can see me.
So if you ate out, for instance, and you all of a sudden your blood sugar is going like really rapidly up, and you realize you ate something that you didn't realize had a lot of carbohydrate. How do you know how many units of insulin to take to bring it back down? Do you just sort of experiment? Do you take like a couple of units and then see what happens, and then keep adding?
Well, people have different needs, insulin needs.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the system that I work is that 1 unit of insulin equals dropping my glucose level 25 points.
And that's just from doing it over and over. You can
Yes,
kind of
I've worked that out. And you can,
Right.
again, this is the benefit of a constant blood glucose
Right.
monitor. You can experiment. So for me, if I discovered that I was 200, if my blood glucose level was 200 after a meal, I'd give it a few minutes and see if it was still rising.
Right.
But if it was 200, I would take probably 2 units with the theory that it will drop down to 150 and then it will gradually bring it back down again.
Mm-hmm.
I try not to take too much
Because that's dangerous too.
because then it might catch up with you. And again, that's the wonder of having a constant blood glucose monitor, because you really can at least make adjustments. But I don't take insulin if my blood glucose level is lower. I'll wait to eat something before having the insulin. But you must always
Right.
remember, So what I would do normally is I would dial up what I need and put the insulin pen right in front of me,
Right.
so that I knew that. Or again, you can just go, "Hey Siri, remind me in 10 minutes to take my insulin,"
Right.
and then Siri will respond and tell me.
Sometimes.
Um,
On it. Okay. Added to today's reminders.
Also, what I've seen you also do is when you're like at a restaurant or you're at someone's home invited for dinner, and your blood sugar is not ready to eat, or you're a little on the high side, you will eat everything but the carbohydrate.
yes,
Wait till the end of the conversation, and everyone might look at you and go, "Why is he not eating his potatoes?" But it doesn't matter. And
Yeah,
then
yeah.
you just keep going with the conversation, and then by the time
you get through.
you get through it, it might have dropped to a point where you can eat it.
Right.
And so that is very admirable that you would manage it up to that level, because there's so many people who just wouldn't even bother. They're like, "Okay, well, I'm at a restaurant, I'm at someone's house, it's rude, I'm just going to eat."
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's no need. I mean, you
No.
can manage it.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I won't eat if my blood glucose is high.
Right.
So what I will do is I'll look at what's going on in the kitchen without spying, and look and go, okay, I'm high, I'm going to inject. It looks like, or I'll say, how far is dinner away? I mean, just so I know, as you know, I'm diabetic. I just help me. And they might say, oh, it's I'm going to put it on the table in 20 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and I look and go, well, I'm 150. Okay, I can inject now, and it'll be down at that point. Or as you described, if I go to a restaurant and I am high and I'm annoyed by it, but it's like, well, okay, I've got to deal with it. I don't need to mess everybody else's life up by saying, well, can we go half an hour later? I'll just go to the restaurant and order a steak or a piece of grilled fish with other things. I can always eat a salad, providing it doesn't have a sweet salad dressing or fruit in it. I won't eat candied walnuts or blueberries or whatever in the salad, and I'll just eat perhaps some a plain salad, and then I'll eat the steak and leave the baked potato, or I'll eat the steak and the broccoli, and there are ways around it, and it really doesn't have to be that hard. All you've got to do is just be aware, and I'm not pedantic about this. I mean, some may think I am, but I really feel that I'm protecting myself, I'm protecting my longevity, and I hope that I can act as as a good leader for other people who face diabetes, because clearly
Right.
it's growing. The population with diabetes is growing, and again, having lived through all the different stages of what we've had as treatments, this just seems like a miraculous time, and one I'm really grateful for, that it doesn't need to be hard.
If you're low, if you realize you're low, what food is the quickest or the best way for you to rapidly increase your sugar?
Well, again, I always have those glucose tablets, and they're pretty easy to take. If I'm in a meeting, I'll just, in front of people, I'll just eat it, just go, like, I need to boost my energy or whatever, and I'll eat, three, glucose tablets. I'll eat a banana, if I want to give myself a boost. I find in the middle of the night bananas are really good because they're easy to, eating an apple is a lot of hard work, and you have to make your jaws work hard. And,
Right.
Whereas half a banana in the middle of the night, if I'm getting a little low, works wonders.
Right.
And it will also provide sort of a long tail.
Yeah, the glycemic index isn't what other substances or
Yeah,
other foods.
and it'll maintain my blood glucose,
Right.
And manage it well. Obviously there are many other sweet things. I always have a jar of honey that I can take a couple of spoonfuls of, and that'll bring me up pretty rapidly, and that's a good thing.
And you do love ice cream.
Yes, I know there are some ice creams that I will have. If in the evening after dinner, my blood glucose goes a little low, and that can be because I didn't eat enough carbohydrate, or it may be that I did more exercise on that day. Could be any number of reasons. But again, because I can monitor it, I know that I'm going to go low, so I'll have a couple of spoonfuls of ice cream and some sugar-free Jell-O, and feel like I've had a great dessert.
How important do you think it is to have home-cooked meals?
Well, I think there's a real benefit of having the ability to eat food, whether you prepare it or whether you've got a partner who prepares it, who cooks great food. Clearly you're a great cook and you understand it, and knew how to create these great meals. So I think it's for me it's preferable. Yes, I like restaurants, but I wouldn't want to eat in restaurants too many times. I just feel I've got dramatically more control, and you can pre-prepare meals and put them in the freezer
And
or
you
in the
can
fridge.
have your portion of carbohydrate exactly the way you
Yeah.
know it works for you.
Exactly, yes. So I've got jars of rice that I know how much is in it, and or I'll put meals together if I'm going to freeze them.
And you get specific bread where you know the carbohydrate of that specific bread, so it's
Right.
not just any bread.
Right, yeah.
You don't experiment. And if you experiment with bread, you'll be very cautious until you really, even though it says the carbohydrate content, you don't always know how big the slices are and
Right. Yeah.
those things. So I think that's also good to know.
Oh, it varies widely. You can go into a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's, and you can look at the breads, and it can, each slice can have anywhere between sort of 24 grams or 26 grams of carbohydrate down to 13 grams, because the slices vary in size, and you'll just find the ones that work for you and that you like. You need to like it. You shouldn't be putting yourself through punishment, but and also similarly with crackers and so forth. If I'm going to have cheese and crackers, you can find crackers that have about 1 gram of carbohydrate in each, and they're easy to make those choices rather than those that have 3 grams of carbohydrate, because if you have 9 grams of carbohydrate before dinner rather than 3 grams, it's a difference maker.
Right. Do you know much about the stem cell research that they're doing now?
I think some of it looks very promising. I think there's still a little distance to go, because the fact is with any any sort of addition of something to the body, then you have to take the anti-rejection drugs, and I believe the side effects of those continue to be troubling. But I think the research that's going on is spectacular, and I don't think we're too far away from having answers. But I'm not holding out for that. If I just had what I have now for the rest of my life, I'd think that I lived through the golden years.
Right. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit, and if there's anything else that we haven't talked about, we can do more. Talk more about it.
perfectly happy to, and I want diabetics to take care of themselves. It's not that hard, and I think that they could really benefit greatly, and their quality of life can be really great. I don't feel that I've missed out. In fact, I look back on life, having had it for 52 years and having watched my father die in a horrible way.
And he wasn't, how old was he?
He was 46.
Right,
And
that's very young.
And I was 14, and it had a big effect on me. And
So you can imagine people who they don't feel the consequences of their condition now, and they think, oh, it's further down the road. You think at 46, you're a parent with kids, school age sometimes.
yeah,
And here you are, and you have legs that need to be amputated.
I have two friends that have lost toes, who are diabetic, and one his lower leg, and he should never have done it. I mean, it could have easily been different, and he just refused to listen to my pleadings of you're not right. Your A1C levels are not good, no matter what you tell me. Your doctor cannot be telling you that it's okay.
Right.
He damaged his foot, got a blister, it didn't heal, lost his toe, then lost 4 other toes, then his foot became infected, it didn't heal, lost his leg, his lower leg now, and he now has a prosthetic leg. The concept of that for me is alarming and completely unnecessary, and I find that very disturbing.
Right.
So there are the consequences of what can happen. It's so easy. I mean, I think I feel pretty dang good every day, and I think I'm much healthier with diabetes than if I didn't have diabetes.
Right.
And I think I'll probably
you have
live
to
longer.
Be more disciplined.
Yeah, and I think I'll
Right.
live longer than I would have if I hadn't got diabetes. Because I've got friends around, who are my age that are dying. But I of course, there's been remarkable changes in the time I've had diabetes.
Right.
And I'm incredibly grateful that I have a constant blood glucose monitor, and I've got a couple of insulin pens, and I can keep myself in pretty good shape. I mean, we all want to be slimmer, more muscular, more wonderful, but I'm really content that I can manage myself, and all of the the desires to be better, it's up to me. I better get out and hike 5 miles this week every day, and do more press-ups and lift more weights.